I know we're going to start early. Let's start a minute early, so if everybody will come on and have their seats, we would appreciate it. I want to call this board meeting to order, and I'd ask you, if you would, to silence your telephones, and appreciate your attendance. We've got a great group here today, and we appreciate you coming. And here's my phone ringing right now, so I'm turning it off. Let me do something first. If you're at a meeting today for the first time, would you raise your hand and just tell us who you are and where you're from? Andy. Andy's the new director of the independent colleges. And we're glad to have you. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you very much. Jack, glad to have you. Yes, sir. Good, thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm Brad Bain, Vice President of Academic Affairs at Black River Technical College.
Good.
I'm Connie Patton, Market Vice President.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm the CEO Vice President of Academic Affairs at CR.
Good, thank you. Good. Behind that, yes, sir. Good, glad to have you. Anybody behind that post I can't see back there? Anybody? Senator, introduce yourself while we got you right here. From Batesville. Glad to have you, Senator. Anybody else? Let me introduce to you now, just take a minute, introduce you to you our new three new board members. I'm going to ask them to take a minute and go in this order. Bill Clary from Conway, and then Andy McNeil from Russellville, and then Chad Hooten from Little Rock. Just take a minute and tell us about yourself.
I'm Bill Clary. I live in Conway. Been there about 20-something years. Originally from Russellville. Went to school at Arkansas Tech. Got my master's at UCA. I'm married with 2 kids. I'm the CEO of Arkansas State Employee Benefit Advisors, an insurance agency here in Little Rock.
Good morning. My name is Andy McNeil. I'm from Russellville. I run a company called Denali Water Solutions. We handle waste all over the United States. I've got 4 kids, 2 still in college. One's at Vanderbilt and one's in SMU. And just happy to be here.
The first time today, but I've known Chad for 25 years. Chad, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dr. Carr. I'm Chad Hooten. My brother and I own Hooten Publishing Incorporated. My wife, Ashley, and I have been married 20 years. We have 3 children, live here in Little Rock. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Chad. Let me also mention before we begin, if you're going to address the board today, please come to the microphone and introduce yourself and tell us your institution. We would appreciate that. At this time, we're going to have our Finance Committee meeting, and I'll ask Mr. Anderson to take over now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is action item number 8. It's the operating recommendations for 2020-21 biennium beginning on page 8.1 of the agenda book. Mr. Fuller, take it away.
Good morning. The first item this morning is the operating recommendations for state operating levels for the institutions of higher education. These are based off of the productivity funding recommendations that you all approved in October, as well as current estimates for the Educational Excellence Trust Fund and Workforce 2000 funding. Non-formula recommendations are based off of the second year recommendation that was approved last year that went before the legislature. ADHE staff is recommending an additional 2% spending authority above the recommended funding levels to account for any fluctuations within the forecast for special revenues. So in Table A, you'll see a summary of the operating recommendations for the different types of institutions. The total on the productivity side for recommendations was $642 million, and on the non-formula and health care related side is $234 million. Table B is an example of the productivity recommendation that we approved in October, which was an increase of 1.52%. And Table C is an outline of the operating recommendation for the 4-year institutions. It is really compacted on this slide, but if in your book it may be a little easier to see. This includes all of the current year funding between the Educational Excellence Workforce 2000 and the Revenue Stabilization Act, then the recommended distribution for productivity funds, and then in the green columns on the end, you'll see the total funding as well as the 2% appropriation on top of the funding level for a total recommendation. Table D is the same thing for the two-year institutions. And Table E is for the non-formula entities for their recommendations. And ADHE staff recommends approval of these recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Any questions? Nick, help me out on the math. It's probably been explained to me before. So, but on page 8-2, the productivity funding model calculation represents total increase of 1.52%.
Yes, sir.
Correct. But is that yet the total funding amount of 6.3 roughly for universities and 2.2 for two-year colleges? That adds up to 1.33%. Those numbers, are they not supposed to tie? In other words, is it not a 1.52% increase in funds, or how does the math work on that?
If you're looking for just strictly year over year, yes, it's going to be a little bit different.
Okay.
Because in the productivity model, there is the cap on how much institutions-based funding can increase for a year.
Okay.
If you look like in the table C,
Right.
see what chart that on 3, 4, 8, 5, I guess is the page. Table C for the four-year institutions. In that first section of the white, you can see there's a RSA forecast, and then there's a one-time incentive funding in RSA.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers get they get reduced from the institution's base level.
Okay.
So once you take that funding back out, then you apply the 1.52% for the increase.
Gotcha. So
that's why they don't tie directly.
right, okay, that makes sense. So thank you for that explanation.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the committee?
The recommendation for 4 years was, well, total it was $8.4 million in new funds. The split, what is it? That's the 6.2 and then 2.1, yes, sir.
Other questions? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to recommend this to the full board? So moved. Here first, second, all those in favor, aye. Those opposed? No. Motion carries, it's approved. Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Next item on the agenda is item number 9. This is for the personal service recommendations, and it begins on page 9, one of the agenda book. Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. The next item is the recommendation for personal services, the various positions on institution campuses. With the last biennium, the classified positions were also shifted to the Division of Higher Ed for Administration away from the Office of Personnel Management. So now the board reviews all positions on institutions for recommendations to the legislature. With this request, line item maximum salaries were adjusted by 1.9% for the second year. Salary recommendations for new positions were based on salaries for similar positions at comparable institutions. And then when making recommendations, we consider the listed variables there for current vacant position usage on the campus within the same title being asked for, positions that were tied directly to student support, and trying to keep position changes minimal through the fiscal session. So with that, the ADHE staff recommended a net decrease in total positions of 45, which is a 0.2% decrease, for a total of 27,986 positions without UAMS included in that number. UAMS itself requested no increases and currently has 11,558 authorized positions. And ADHE staff recommends approval of this item.
Questions? Hearing none, Chair would entertain a vote to approve. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
First. Second. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. That will stand approved. Let's see, item number 10. This is the annual higher education finance condition report. It begins on page 10-1 of the agenda book. Mr. Fuller, again, you've got the floor.
Thank you. This report describes the financial conditions of Arkansas's public institutions of higher education and describes challenges experienced by those public institutions. Different topics addressed are the productivity-based funding, comparison of faculty salaries to other SREB states, tuition and fees, fund balances of the institutions, institutional scholarship expenditures, and athletic expenditures. I'm not going to go through every one of those, but there are a few highlighted charts to go through today in the presentation. First one I want to go over is the comparison of faculty salaries to other SREB states. If you look, Arkansas is 16th out of 16 in the SREB on faculty salaries for the prior year of 2018, with an average salary of $68,949. This is a decrease from the prior year, where we were 10th out of 16 with an average salary of $75,000. This is for the 4-year institutions. On the 2-year institutions, we are 14th out of 16, an average salary of $45,328. And in 2017, we were 7th with an average salary of $52,398. So there's a decrease for both.
Why is that?
There are various reasons that are possible for this. It could be some of the institutions offered early retirement buyouts, so the longer tenured faculty with the higher salaries may have retired, and the new employees coming in started with a lower salary. We kind of skew the average lower. In 2017 was a spike in the salaries. We jumped up quite a bit from what we were in 2016, so it could have been just an anomaly year of a higher salary throwing off the average. I don't have a specific reason as to why they decreased so much.
Just seems like that's a pretty significant decrease.
It is a large drop.
And especially comparative to what was the previous year.
Yes, sir.
Could I ask a question? When you start looking at salaries for the 2-year colleges, if we had fewer 2-year colleges, could we pay better?
That would depend on the funding dedicated to.
Increased more and more and more. So I'm just saying, well, you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, sir. I don't know that I would be able to answer that.
Well,
currently,
obviously, after it gets started, you don't ever do anything with it.
Yes, sir.
Nick, how would it look if you address this by professorial rank, by different? Are we going to be still close to the bottom, comparing our professors, full professors, associate professor, assistant, and so forth?
More than likely. I don't have that data right now, but it would be comparable. They kind of tier through the same levels for each of those.
Reason I asked that is you said we early retired, I guess, several senior faculty members, and we've hired some younger ones in. Are they coming in at a lower rank, and thus our ranks might not be that far off? Just a question.
Sure. And just like the entry level for that faculty, the one that's been here longer, their salaries progress throughout the years of being there, and the newer ones come in at that entry level salary.
Dr. Carr, I know, I mean, I'm not saying this against Nick, but I think Nick just said that might be something that happened. He doesn't really know that that's what's happening.
I don't have a definitive answer.
You know, and I think it'd be interesting to know why our salary average dropped that much. And to, you know, especially because, did you say we went from 7th to last?
So we went from 7th to 14th on the 2-year side.
Okay.
On the 4-year side, we were 10th last year, 10th to 16th.
I think that it should be noted that Arkansas is not a unique state. So as far as retirements, I don't know that we can assume that that's what happened in Arkansas, because our faculty are relatively comparable to what the ages of faculty would be in other states. So I think this deserves a little more attention, some more research on that. We've reached out to a couple institutions to see what dynamics might be happening on their campus, but I think that this is something that we should research a little further and report back to the board.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that one of the things that I think is we look at higher education and we look at what the salaries are here compared to other states, you know, I think that's something that's important both for attracting quality candidates for positions and also just for the overall welfare of what people perceive higher education as. And when we drop that significantly, I think we need to know why. You know, if there's a reason for it, I think that's good, but I'd like to know why anyway.
I'd be glad to report back to you if we find a definitive answer for what caused it.
Thank you.
With that follow-up, could we also add the impact of that drop on the ability to find quality candidates, the ability, how long it takes to fill? Do we have an average that we're looking at, time it takes to fill needed positions? It's one thing to say it dropped, but I want to see the impact of it and how it's affecting everybody in this room.
Can I ask I'm curious, when you look at this data right here, did other states move around as significantly as well?
Yes, there are fluctuations and changes between all of the states. I can get you kind of a comparable graph for year over year to see where those different states fall out.
So is one conclusion from that it does include oddball things like severance pay or retirement pay?
Or it's possible, but like I said, we can't say that definitively that that's what caused it.
Is there a definition of what faculty means in this?
Yes. There's a section of the authorized positions that include, which are established as faculty authorized within the Act for each of the schools, and we take the salaries of those positions that are filled on the campus.
So it's not back office or anything like that?
No, it's not the administrative positions. It's strictly faculty salary.
Then how much does adjunct faculty play into this total? One of the statements in this report is that there's a trend towards using more adjunct faculty. Obviously, those people will be paid very differently than a full-time faculty person. How does that affect this number?
I don't know that it would affect the average on the salary, because we're still just going to take the salary of the people in the faculty positions.
Adjunct does not come into play into the calculation.
We would calculate those into the averages.
Oh. But if you used more adjunct faculty and hired fewer full-time, that could affect the average.
Or the ones that are still in the full-time are those lower salaried.
So actually, that could be a factor, and that's one of the trends that's mentioned in this report. Interesting. Other questions from the committee? Or Nick, are you? Yeah, go ahead.
The next item would be the comparison of changing funds per FTE students to other SREB states. This is total university revenue, which includes state revenues, tuition and fees, other outside sources. On the four-year institutions, Arkansas is 15th out of 16, with an average growth of about 7.6%. And this is a comparison of 2012-13 to 2017-18, so over a five-year span. We grew about 7.6%. On the two-year institutions, the growth in total funds per FTE student, we are second in the SREB region with a growth of a little over, or right around 37%. The next item for review is tuition and fees on the campuses. And with the addition of around $13 million so far through the productivity funding model, the institutions have been tasked with trying to keep tuition and fee increases to a minimum to transfer that affordability to the students. Even with this increased funding on the state side, institutions had to increase their tuition and fees on the four-year side by 3.1% from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, and two-year institutions increased their tuition and fee by 2.7%. As you can see from the data at the bottom of the chart, the SREB average for four-year institutions increase was 5.7% and 4.2% on the two-year. So even with our increases, we are still increasing those rates less than the regional average. There's a chart breaking down each of the four-year schools with their one-year increase and then the five-year average increase of around 3.9%. On the two-year side, their five-year average increase was 3.6%. The next chart I'm going to show you is the fund balances.
Hey, Nick?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm going back a couple of slides.
Sure.
I can't keep up with you. So.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at this comparison of changes in funds. Two questions. First question is, when you look at, like, for example, on the four-year if you look at Florida and how much theirs has increased, do we have any idea how much of that is state generated and how much is tuition generated?
I don't have the breakdown with me right now, but I think we have the chart that shows the breakdown of whether it's state or tuition.
Okay. And then we had a tremendous increase in 2-year. Would that translate into more students going to 2-year colleges instead of 4-year?
I don't know that it would be due to that, since this is funding per FTE. So we had a large increase in the students going that would reduce the per student funding.
It wouldn't have to do with more students going, it'd just be, okay.
It helps on their side, the proportionate rate with the influx of the state funds that are going in to those schools.
Thank you. I'm sorry I got behind.
And the next item, this is the fund balances as a percentage of the revenue that comes into each school. According to industry standards, optimal fund balances should be somewhere between 5% to 14% of the educational general operating budget of an institution. For 2018-19, all but 2 of the 4-year institutions' fund balances were above the 5% minimum recommended level. For that same year, there was 1 2-year institution whose fund balance was below the 5% level. And there's a chart of the 4-year institutions showing each of their fund balances as a percentage of revenue for the last 5 years. And then a chart of the 2-year institutions, the same 5-year history. And the next item to show on the report is the institutional scholarships. Arkansas Code 680-106 sets limitations on the percentage of tuition and fee revenue that can be spent on institutional academic and performance scholarships. This limit is set at 20% of an institution's revenue. In 2018-19, there were 16,659 scholarships awarded at 4-year institutions, a total of $68.6 million. This is in comparison to 14,472 scholarships at a cost of $62.7 million the prior year. So scholarships as a percentage of tuition and fees was 8.9% in FY19 compared to 8.2% the year prior. And here's a chart breaking down each institution and then their percentage of scholarships as a percentage of tuition and fees. And one of the last items, the other thought I wanted to point out in this report is the capital funding for institutions. Our facilities audit program reported that replacement value for educational and general facilities is $5.3 billion, and the maintenance needs on those buildings is shown at $3 billion in deferred maintenance, with $244 million of that classified as critical maintenance. I want to point this out because at the current time, there is no dedicated funding in the state for deferred or critical maintenance at the institutional level. So institutions are having to use tuition fee revenue, state revenues, anything else that they have to be able to repair the buildings as anything comes up, as there's no money dedicated for that purpose. And then recommendations from the report is that we continue to work with institutions to monitor and refine the productivity funding model. And then we work with the legislature toward alignment of institutional funding policies, state financial aid policies, and tuition policies in a way that prioritizes higher education affordability. It's the financial conditions report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Questions from the committee? I had a question if I can find it here. Hold on. On page 1012, I guess under campuses, this is back to the facility question and capital expenditures, and I guess ties into the deferred critical maintenance. But we make the statement that 50% of university facilities are more than 30 years old. And after the facility has reached the 30-year mark, most of the life expectancy out of the building for that system has elapsed. I guess I'm asking where that definition comes from, what it's based on, and I'm not sure I agree with it.
Sorry, there's the book, I can't think of the name of it, that we use in determining the, what is it, Chandra? RS means? Yes, the RS means that we use to calculate the square footage and deferred maintenance. That's where we get the information from.
So
Is that correct? Yeah.
I guess I'm also interested in definitions that you probably don't have at your fingertips, but what is the definition of critical maintenance? And maintenance in general, and how do we reach those definitions? How do we come up with those dollar amounts? And then more importantly, how do we balance that? Another chart shows, which we've seen in past meetings, is the declining student population that colleges and universities are going to have to deal with. That reality is just fewer people going, fewer students that are going to be available. So how do we deal with that from a facility standpoint? And, how do we balance those decisions? Because I noticed also somewhere else is talked about we're spending a lot of money on new buildings. As we say, we have have maintenance issues and maintenance demands on existing buildings. So my question is, how does that balance with reality? And the other thing I'd point out in this report is I didn't see, and if I missed it, point it out to me, but of all the factors to consider, I didn't see anything about the use of technology in terms of productivity and how that factors in also into on the building side and the capital side. But was that considered at all in this report as we put it together?
No, sir, I don't know. We did not take that into consideration. What I can do on the facility side is at a future meeting, we can give you kind of an overview of that facilities audit program and how we get the information to calculate what that deferred maintenance and critical maintenance is.
I think that would be beneficial. I mean, if the rest of the committee agrees, because if you just look at that statement, that's a pretty big number.
Yes, it is.
It causes you to step back, but it'd be good to drill down maybe that and know a little more.
And yeah, I know you told me this before, but when did they start having on the new loans that they take out or new bonds they issue? When did they start having that maintenance cost put on?
It's the year after the building is complete and occupied.
No, but I mean, when did they start that? Because it's not on every building in there.
Oh, when did they start doing that?
Yeah, like in 1980 or 1990 or?
Okay. October of 2010.
Okay. So essentially, all the buildings on campus
prior to that
don't have that.
Yes, sir.
So is there and that's part of the problem, right?
Right.
Can you clarify, you said there's nothing budgeted for the deferred maintenance. What do you mean when you say that? I mean,
there's not a dedicated source of state funds.
So there's no fund balance
No, sir.
earmarked.
Is
there a maintenance plan?
I'm sorry?
Is there a maintenance plan?
I mean,
there's multi-year maintenance plans in each building. Is that
yes,
true?
on any buildings that are being built new or renovated or anything, when they come before you, they have to set aside a certain dollar amount for ongoing maintenance of those buildings on the new buildings. But prior to 2010, there wasn't anything structured to require that.
So you're budgeting maintenance, but you're just not setting aside capital for future maintenance. Is that the way?
They are setting aside on new buildings. They started that in 2010.
And with that too, the money that's being set aside for that new maintenance is still coming from the institution from revenues they already have. There's not a dedicated source of revenue for that maintenance from any outside entity or any state funds.
But regardless if this number is right or wrong, there's just nothing there for the old ones. Got it.
But Nick, didn't we learn just a few meetings ago that the definition of maintenance doesn't cover generators and chillers and high-end major expenditures?
Right. If something like that were to fail, then the funds still aren't available just at the ready. It'd have to come out of some other portion of the budget.
If I remember right, maintenance was floors, walls, paint, general upkeep.
Right.
But as far as physical plant, even since 2010, there's no dedicated fund set aside for that.
Right. I mean, and even on that, the revenue that has to be set aside is just a percentage. So it's not a calculated amount on cost of individual items.
Other questions? Hearing no other questions, I don't think this needs, actual approval, does it? Yeah, it's information only, so no vote required on that. So, let's move on to agenda item number 11. This is the economic feasibility of loan issue for the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. That begins on page 11-1 of your agenda book. Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. This item is going to be a loan for $1 million with a term of 10 years at a rate not to exceed 0%. It's for educational and general purposes, and revenue funding will come from tuition and fee revenue. This loan is being sought from the Arkansas Sustainable Building Design and Revolving Loan Fund, which is managed from the Division of Building Authority. Proceeds from the loan will be used to replace 2 aged and failing chillers and the associated cooling tower and pumps, which meet the Revolving Loan Fund energy-saving requirements. There are representatives from the institution here to provide information on the item as well, I believe.
Questions? Let's see, do we have someone from the institution here this morning? Can come forward. Good morning. Yeah, if you could identify yourself and your, yeah, perfect.
I'm Steve McClellan. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the university.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. Questions of the institution regarding the issue? I've got a quick question. What are the projected savings from the expenditures on this?
I think to qualify for the loan, it requires at least 25% of your expenditure should be in energy savings. I think that is the requirement of the DBA loan process itself. To replace each other is really not a choice. They're failing. It's some of that deferred maintenance that you talked about.
Right.
And instead of using institutional reserve, we had access to the 0 free interest loan. We see it a much better approach.
Okay, so I would imagine your utility bill is going to go down a little bit. Were there any rebates at all available that you researched from?
Energy tax rebates?
Mm-hmm.
I do not know. We have not contracted with the engineer to design the project yet. We would try to secure the funding first, and if there is, there won't be anything large. But there should be some type of energy credits that should be due.
Okay, that's good to know.
Are you fairly certain that $1 million will cover it?
I'm sorry?
Are you certain that $1 million will meet your needs?
Our immediate needs, yes. We probably are going to come into a phase 2 that would not require a loan. It's the energy savings proposal. But this is just to get the chillers and pumps in place before the summer. This past year, we've had some challenging days with this older equipment.
Any other questions?
I do, and just as to the longevity of this, I think it's more than 1 chiller and a cooling tower, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And so, general life expectancy?
25 years, you usually are fairly comfortable with it. These are in excess of 30 years. This building is built in 1934. So you're talking about an 85-year-old building that was converted from a hospital to the law school, and so I think these chillers were done either right when we purchased the property 30-something years ago.
So the building actually lasted more than 30 years.
It is, 85 years. Yeah. I found out interesting when you were asking that question. This building is the second oldest building we have. We have a barn on campus that is older, but the law school was actually built in 1934.
Kudos to you for making that building last. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hearing no other questions, would entertain a motion to approve. There's a first. Do I hear a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 12. This is the economic feasibility of loan issue for Arkansas School of Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts. It begins on page 12-1 of the agenda book. Mr. Fuller.
This item is going to be for a $1 million loan with a term of 10 years as well. This at a rate not to exceed 2.5%. This is also going to be for educational general purposes with revenue funds from their educational general revenues. Proceeds from the loan will be used to renovate current structures into expanded student residences and shared community spaces, which will allow the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Science, and the Arts to accommodate approximately 24 additional students. And representatives from the institution are here to answer any questions in regard to this item.
Yeah, if there's anyone here, please come forward. Center mic there, just identify yourself and your position.
Good morning. Corey Allardyce, Director of the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts.
Thank you for being here this morning. Any questions from the committee on this issue?
Would you like to comment on the need for this?
Sorry?
You want to comment on this? Go ahead.
Sure, happy to do so. One of the interesting things about this project is that it is done as part of a program-related investment loan through a partner national foundation. ASMSA has doubled the number of students that are interested in attending the program relative to the space that we're able to accommodate through our residential experience. So we're very excited that the capacity for this program should allow us to increase our student enrollment by about 10%. So housing, tuition, and meals are provided at no cost through the state's investment. There is a maximum $850 in assessments to students each year. $350 are part of a residential assessment, but that includes things like Parents Association, yearbook, all-you-can-do laundry, no need to keep quarters around, that kind of thing. And then $500 of that is an annual concurrent credit assessment. Our partnership through UA Fort Smith allows our students to average about 50 hours of college credit by the time they finish high school. And then for low-income students, which are about 34% of our population, we waive that assessment entirely.
You say this expansion is needed due to increased interest. That interest is over recent years or just this most recent year? Could you talk about that application growth or interest growth?
Sure. Interest has been steady over the past decade, double to what we're able to admit. I am very encouraged by this year's numbers already, which we have more applications now going into February 1st than we did as our kind of March 15th cutoff date last year, by about 100 or so applications, even more. So that's pretty significant growth, and we certainly feel like this is well needed.
Any other questions?
So you're not really expanding though, right?
We would grow enrollment from 236 to about 206 students. Sorry?
Footprint-wise?
No, this is an existing structure that is on campus adjacent to the current student center, and so these are buildings that are simply in need of renovation to serve this purpose.
So, okay, thank you. That's what I thought I read. One thing that I want to bring up to the board, and it's our policy that set that up in 2010, that we set up that square footage, that amount per square footage for maintenance. This is the second loan that we're approving that doesn't add any of that, because they're not changing any square footage. And if you're putting $1 million into something that's going to last 30 years, there should be something paid back for that. They should be holding something back for that. In the case of UALR, and in this case also, if they're improving something that it's still got a life, and there's still a maintenance aspect to that. And we may need to review that in the future, and see what we can come up with to try to make that a better thing, to help them be better prepared for things that come up in the future. Just a thought.
Agree.
Point. Any other questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item will stand approved. Action item number 13, last item on the list, economic feasibility. The issuance of a line of credit for Henderson State University begins on page 13-1 of your agenda book. Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. This item is for a $3 million revolving line of credit loan that will provide overdraft protection of payroll drafts in the case of the monthly allotment of state general revenue funds not yet received in the payroll account. This is for educational general purposes for the payroll, and revenue funding will be from tuition and fee revenue. Proceeds from this line of credit will be used to bridge the timing difference between the occurrence of payroll drafts and the receipt of state general revenue funds. There are representatives from the institution here to speak on this as well.
Okay, if we have someone from the institution, come forward.
Raise that thing up a little bit.
Chuck Welch, president of the Arkansas State University System, and of course Henderson is in process of becoming a member of our system, as voted on by both boards of trustees shortly before the end of the year. I can tell you we are absolutely not interested at all in any new long-term debt for the institution, but I think the financial challenges of the university have been rather public. We came on board in August after all this was revealed to help with that. We've made significant strides, but still one of the big challenges is cash flow. And the uncertainty of when the state appropriations is able to be drawn down can cause some challenges. Literally, 2 of the last payrolls or so, we got the drawdown the day before payroll had to be done. I think you probably know, as has been very public, that Henderson had spent through almost all of their reserves over the last few years, and so it leaves us a little bit of a crunch. This is simply a mechanism to allow us to have funds available on the payroll dates, just in case the state funds were to be a day or two delayed over when we'd ordinarily expect to receive those. We would anticipate that anything drawn from this line would be paid back within the course of just a matter of a couple of days, and hopefully we never have to use it, but we're just trying to make sure we have every safety mechanism in place as possible.
How much is your payroll run?
It's about $3 million, somewhere in that ballpark.
Questions? So this wouldn't be used for any other reason other than payroll?
Simply just a backup plan.
So not working capital, just payroll.
No.
Just payroll, just timing.
That's right.
Dr. Welch, thank you for your, right here.
Where are you? Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Carr.
Thank you so much for your service to the state by even helping Henderson right now and taking it over. The question I have is that what got us into trouble, if I understand it correctly, was some student loan money. It was not collected.
That was oh, I'm sorry.
Is that money coming in now? Are we collecting it and it's...
Sure, let me answer that 2 ways. That was definitely a piece of it. The biggest issue was just overspending and inflated revenues and underreported expenditures. But certainly there was an issue over the course of the last 2 years where students were being allowed to incur as much as $4,800 in debt before a hold was placed on their account, and they weren't allowed to register. That's far more than what we would allow in our system, what most institutions do. We came in at the beginning when we came in August, we worked with Henderson officials to change that policy. It's now a $200 threshold. But obviously, we have a lot of backlog students who had been allowed to incur that debt, some as much as $20,000. And one of the first things we talked to Henderson about was having a stair-stepped, phased approach for that old debt. Because I said, if you say you got to pay $10,000 by X date, they're going to walk, and we're never going to see those funds, or it's going to be much harder to get it. And so we have developed a phased-in approach. As of last Wednesday, I believe, from July 1st to last Wednesday, we had actually been able to collect $1,044,000. $988,000 of that had come from that 4,800 population. That is considerably more than I would have ever predicted we would be able to collect. And we're not allowing, now, while we're letting those students stair-step down their old debt or their pre-existing debt, we're not allowing them to put anything on top of that. So if they're registering for a subsequent semester, they've got to pay all of that in full while also addressing that old debt. But we're making progress. As I said to the Legislative Committee on Friday, this is a multi-year process, but certainly it's in much better shape now than it was 6 months ago.
Well, I want to thank you again for working with the institution and for it's a service to the state of Arkansas. I appreciate so much what you all have done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The 1.4 million, I think you just said 1.4 million that you've been successful in collecting?
$1,044,000.
I'm sorry, $1,044,000. Congratulations on that. Do you know what percentage that is of the outstanding that you've
I don't know the exact percentage. There was about $10 million total. Now, that's a misleading figure, though. Some of that debt goes back to 1986.
Sure.
There weren't appropriate amounts being written off through the years, too, or as deemed uncollectible and things of that nature. I really think it was probably closer to 4 or 4.5 million in that population. Great. So a quarter of it or so that we've been able to do.
Great.
So far. Which, yeah, in that short time period, I'm rather stunned that we got that much.
Thanks, sir.
Other questions? I move we approve it.
Thanks, guys.
Second?
Thank you. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Circling back to one of your other questions, I do have the definition of critical maintenance, if you want that.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
That a critical maintenance project is an item that's been deemed critical that must be addressed before the end of the biennium, and if neglected, could result in substantial damage to the structural integrity of a building or needs that are related to the imminent failure of building systems such as HVAC, electrical, and plumbing.
Okay, I mean, that's a common sense definition. It'd be interesting.
It's something that, immediate need rather than just deferred maintenance.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, or maybe we have that information. Again, I don't expect to have it at your fingertips, but as far as that critical maintenance number, how does that break out by institution? And which institution has what kind of liability?
Sure. And that could be something I could bring to you when we bring you the overview of that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be good to know, who's in that position and what their reserves are and all these other things that you talked about in this report to deal with those issues. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, that's all I have. If I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.